folk radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Today's Monday, October 7th, 2019. $281 days into the new year. Just 84 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? What an amazing week we've got coming up on this show. Kicking it off tonight on this Monday, Jacques Vallee and Alan Stivelman. They are both here to discuss their new film. It is called Witness of Another World. It's the amazing story of Juan Perez. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Alan Stivelman is here with Jacques Vallee. Tomorrow night on the show, right here, Michael Lee Hill. Wednesday night, it is Caroline Corey and her new film, Superhuman. Thursday night is Fader Night, open lines all night long, and then I'm over at Coast to Coast this weekend. All right. Tonight, our guests are Jacques Vallee and Alan Stivelman. Alan is the director of the new film, Witness of Another World. It's an emotional story of a gaucho who at the age of 12 had a supernatural encounter that changed his life forever. It was premiered in cinemas in Spain, Paraguay, and Argentina, being the most watched documentary of the year. The film rights were then acquired by 1091 Media, formerly known as The Orchard, and it's going to be released in a couple of weeks on October 22nd. Witness of Another World features Jacques Vallee. Now, Dr. Vallee, who brings vast experience and an international reputation to the subject of UFOs, met Juan back in 1980 in Argentina shortly after his experience. And the movie shows their emotional reunion 35 years after the initial investigation. Now, regarding the movie, Jacques says, this is the only case in the history of ufology in which a witness has been studied twice at some 40 years' time difference, with his life and the impact of the experience documented fully. But beyond that, it demonstrates the mistakes we in the United States have made in our methodology, and it opens up a way to a new, much richer era of international research. And I would like to welcome to Fade to Black for the first time, Alan Stivelman. Alan, welcome to the program. How are you?
Hi, Jimmy. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to welcome to Fade to Black, also for the first time, Dr. Jacques Vallee. Jacques, good evening.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to discussing this movie.
It's an extraordinary film, and I'm going to say that so many times tonight, and I'm going to try not to be a fanboy. But before we get to that, for the both of you, you get the first-time guest disclaimer. So let me get that out of the way. This is just the three of us sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts, and where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. That's the next time the both of you are on the show, you don't get the disclaimer. So that
very good.
Yeah, it's about time. It's about time. So welcome to the program. And Alan, I'm going to start with you because I have the same question for Jacques. But I'm going to start with you. This case goes back to 1978. And his story, and I'm talking about Watts, his story is just incredible, from start to finish. But how did you find the case? I remember when I first read about it in 78, but how did you find out about the case?
Well, I was writing a script in 2010. I was doing automatic scripture. And then I realized that I was writing a story about an abduction. But at that time, I didn't know nothing about the UFO phenomenon nor the abduction phenomenon. I was mainly focused on ancient civilization research, what is below Earth. I was mainly focused on those kind of mysteries, rather than looking at the stars and see what is beyond the stars. So when I found out that I was writing this kind of story, I started to make some research, buying some books. And one of these books, it's about abduction cases in Argentina. And 10 pages were about one per case. It was written by a psychiatrist from Argentina, Dr. Néstor Berlanda. And when I was showing my previous movie, Humano, in the cinema in Rosario, it's a city near Buenos Aires, 4 hours away from Buenos Aires. In the cinema, it was the author of this book. And I was grabbing this book while I was speaking to the audience, because on the bus I wanted to read something, so I got this book and then I read it. And when we meet each other, we realized that it was not it wasn't by chance. And then we decided to have a lunch the next day. And at his house, he started to talk about the Juan Perez case, that it was one of the most significant cases that he ever researched. And he showed me a video, a very small video that it's on the movie, that it was Juan in front of a big audience talking about his case when he was 18 years old, and he couldn't started to speak about his case because he thought that no one is going to believe him. And then I realized that it was my first time that I was in front of someone who had an encounter with the unknown, with the supernatural. And I wanted to meet him. And 3 months later, I and Dr. Néstor Berlanda went to the countryside, and I met Juan. And when I meet him, I was shooting with my camera, and the first words that he gave to me was about his case, about his dreams, and then he started to cry, and I couldn't keep recording. And then I remember that I just sat down next to him and tried to see what happened to him. And 4 years after, we did this movie.
Yeah, and this is what we need to do here, Jacques, is to establish what actually was happening. In that Juan was living alone with his family. He was a gaucho living on a ranch very remotely. And for you, Jacques, when we look at cases in pop culture, where here in the United States we have access to mass media, or we have access to television programming or books, and we can be maybe polluted, right, in what we are witnessing and what the experience is. But in Juan's case, he didn't have any of that. And for you as a researcher, that just must have floored you, that it's almost impossible to find a witness or somebody in an abduction or ET experience that hasn't been contaminated, right?
That's true. And I met Juan when he was 14. So that was 2 years after his experience. And the way that happened is that I had met a number of researchers from South America at a series of conferences, including conferences in Mexico that I participated in. And I met a leader of UFO research in Argentina named Fabio Serpa. And Fabio Serpa was a historian. He was very well organized. He had a team with him. And he invited me to lecture in Argentina in 1980. And he wanted me to lecture in Spanish in 5 different cities in Argentina. Now, you have to realize, and I think this is something that is important to point out for an American audience. Argentina is equivalent to the size of Europe. It's a very large country, and it has, a sizable population, but the different provinces are very different culturally. And to me, what was fascinating was the opportunity to visit, these 5 cities and to meet people who were doing research in those different provinces. And so I made a deal with Fabio Serpa, saying, okay, we can go to these 5 cities, but I want to have a free day at every place, so that I can meet people who are doing research in those areas. And that's how I met Juan, because we gave a lecture in the far north of Argentina, close to Uruguay, a province called Entre Rios, which is very flat, very isolated, very relatively poor, mostly agricultural, with a number of farms or estancias. And the people we met there, the researchers there, told us that there were a number of reports in the area, and they had organized a meeting with the family of Juan. Now, Juan was then 14, and this was something I will always remember. I mentioned it in one of my books that, in fact, has been translated into Spanish. It was remarkable. We were invited by the family. I met his father. I met his mother, who is a full-blood Guarani Indian. I met his siblings, brothers and sisters, and we had a big lunch, and everybody was there. And the child was very quiet, very serious. My wife, Janine, was with me at the time. As you may know, I lost Janine about 10 years ago. But she was a child psychologist, and the teacher of Juan was there at the lunch as well. So she had a chance to ask, about Juan's work in school and his level of intelligence and this was an extraordinary experience. It was a beautiful child, beautiful family, and what he had seen was extraordinary. And that's what you will see in the film, that Alan has reconstructed very, very well. So I went away with that experience, with a few pictures I took, and we visited the site, and then I wrote about it, and I never forgot that case. And then, 3 years ago, I get a message on the internet from Alan, who says, I'm doing this movie. I've done a movie before called Humano, about the traditions of Indians in Argentina and the mysticism associated with it. But I've met this young man that you write about in your book, and can I come to San Francisco and interview you about him, because it's a unique case, and I don't know what to think about it. And I told him, well, do you know that there were 3 other cases the same week in the same town of Venado Tuerto, which is that at the time was a small town in that province? And he said no, he didn't know that there were other cases. He thought it was something maybe like a dream or like a magical experience of just, an isolated child. And I said, and he described to me that Juan was living alone, had been away from his family, was living in an isolated farmhouse, and was, in a very distraught state. And I thought, if I went there and I reconnected with him, that might help him. It might help him psychologically. It would be an emotional experience for me, of course, because it would reconnect me with the time when I was there and met that family. And I suggested that, that I come to Buenos Aires and that we organize a sort of reconnection with the case. And Alan liked the idea, and that's what the movie is showing.
Jacques, I wanted to ask you, what one of the obvious questions, but for you as a researcher, where you have been looking into not only the UFO and ET question, but different aspects of what could actually be going on. You've heard just about everything and seen just about everything. Then you have this case of Juan Perez, where you must have looked around you and said to yourself, and I'm not being cavalier, Jacques. I'm being very serious.
I understand. I follow you.
Yeah, that you had to look around and go, well, he didn't go see Close Encounters of the Third Kind at the local theater, right? He doesn't have access to this, but there are things that he's talking about here that could only have come from an actual experience. Did you ask yourself those questions?
Yes, of course. And what was important, people think of me as a theoretician because I was trained in astronomy. I've done a lot of computer stuff and looking at statistics and everything else and AI. But I've spent a lot of time in the field, and that's really, both in Argentina. I've gone there twice. I've gone 4 times to Brazil, to different places in Brazil. I've got to Russia 6 times. And, of course, I follow the situation in France and Europe, where I go frequently. And that's what, these people were there. I mean, they had the experience. I didn't. I had an experience of mine, as you know, when I was a teenager in France. But to really understand what's going on, I can't make it up. I have to talk to the people who were there and try to understand, to put it in the context of their family, and here, thanks to Alan, we have the opportunity to see the impact on the life of this child when he grew up and on the impact on him now as a man. And it's a very emotional, that movie would be a great movie even if it hadn't anything to do with UFOs.
Right.
I mean, the UFOs add the mystery But the human experience is extraordinary.
The last 10 minutes of the film, Alan, well done. The last 10 minutes. In fact, the last 15 seconds of the film is extraordinary. And Alan, okay, let's talk about the audience right now is now intrigued, but they actually don't know what happened to Juan Perez that morning in September of 1978. And you had to recreate that for the film, which, by the way, well done. What happened? We'll just start with the basics. He goes out. He gets on his horse. He's the son of a gaucho. He's a gaucho. He doesn't have a choice. He's a cowboy, and he gets on his horse on his family's ranch and heads out. What happens next?
Well, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, as the usual things to do before to go to the school was to do some works in the countryside, in the farm. So every day, his father, that was very strict with him, told him to go to find a herd of horses, and then he climbs up of his horse Cometa, and goes straight to the forest to find those horses. But while he was riding, he finds out that above his head there were 3 lights that were doing like a frenetic dance. He got his horse got really scared, and he thought that he will get injured. Juan thought that, and then he got back to his house and told his father that he found that 3 lights were dancing above his head. And his father ignored him completely and told him that you should go and find those horses, and that's it. Don't bother me. And then he goes back, and then he found a big fog. It was not the typical fog in the morning. It was another kind of texture it had. And then he crossed the fog, and he found that a big, like it was something like similar to, he thought that what he was seeing, it was a tractor or a house for the workers of the farm. He didn't realize that he was seeing like a UFO, but the shape of that object, it was round and it was landed on the earth, on the ground. And then his horse didn't want to go further, and then Juan jumps out of the horse and he goes like very slowly to that ship. Then suddenly the door opens up, and there is a very tall being, like 2.5 meters or 3 meters, that was saying like inviting him to come and enter that ship. But that time, Juan was the only thing that he was thinking. It was like, well, it perhaps is someone of a worker of the farm or something like that. And then a ladder goes down, and he like ties the horse next to the ladder, and then he climbs up. It was the stairs of the ladder were very, very like high, and it was very difficult for him to climb up. Then he goes inside of this ship or this object, and it was really funny because in front of him there was like a transparent wall, like an electromagnetic field that he couldn't pass it. So what he saw was like on his left side there was a small being, like 1 meter, like he was cutting meat above a table, but the meat was not full of blood. There was no blood in the meat. And in his right side, there was this tall being in front of some monitors. There was like a keyboard, but without buttons, more like what we can see now with our tablets or iPads. And then the little being started to go from his side to the Juan's side without difficulties, but Juan couldn't go through this electromagnetic field.
Juan describes it as a glass wall. And also, not to interrupt, but watching the way that Juan deals with it and describes it is extraordinary, because he's never seen anything like, he's never seen a science fiction film, right? And he's describing this technology and what he is seeing for the first time, and it can only be the way that he is describing it. We understand it. We live in a technical society. We totally get it. For him, he's trying to describe something that he has never seen before. He does a pretty good job of it, but it's I can't imagine what he was going through, because he describes the little shorter E.T. being as a little boy, because he doesn't have another way to describe him, right? It's in Jacques, I'm almost thinking innocent. It was an innocent description, right?
Yes. You have to imagine the conditions in which he was living. I mean, that farm was poor. The family was very simple, and that there is no question that the description he gives is accurate, because we very often, I'm angry at the questions that scientists ask, as if people in the country couldn't make good observations around them. But people in the country live by observing nature. They know a lot more, and they notice a lot more details about nature than a scientist coming from a university would in the same environment. And on top of that, Juan was very brave. He was a very brave kid. There was no question when you meet his father. There is no question that the father tells you what to do and you do it. I mean, there is no argument. There is no room for changing the assignment. And he throughout his attitude is one of curiosity and exploration, and it's completely consistent. I mean, there is no room to say, well, maybe he was dreaming, maybe he was, in some sort of state. The whole description is logical. It's logical, and at the same time, it makes no sense. I mean, who are these beings? This very tall, robot-like being, and the short one who is cutting meat on the table. It turns out, so I sent Alan my report from my, the investigation that I did when I was there in 1980, and it included reports of cattle disappearing in the area, and those were the days of cattle mutilations in the United States. They didn't know anything about that in Argentina at the time, and here's this being, inside this so-called UFO, cutting a leg of a cow. I'm going to use extraordinary so many times tonight. I can just feel it coming. I need to take a break right here. Let's do that. Our guests tonight, Alan Stivelman and Jacques Vallee. We're discussing their new film. It is called Witness of Another World. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us. It's Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. All right,
Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, it is Alan Stivelman and Jacques Vallee discussing the new film, Witness of Another World. Tomorrow night, Michael Lee Hill is back joining us. Wednesday night, film director Caroline Corey. Tonight, it's Alan Stivelman and Jacques Vallee. And Alan, in a second, I want to ask you about the recreation that you did. Before we get to that, Jacques, after this goes down, Juan doesn't understand anything. One thing is for sure. He doesn't know if he is going to expose his family to this. Is this a dream? Is he crazy? He doesn't know how to approach this, and there isn't a local support group or anybody for him to turn to, is there?
No, and for the family, this is part of the Latin culture. The reputation of the family is now at stake. Neighbors know that something happened, and it's strange. The reputation of the farm is in question. So and I didn't realize it at the time, but that's very clear from the picture that Alan, painted when he wrote to me, that he was pushed, somewhat estranged from his family over the years. And of course, when Alan met him, he was living by himself, surrounded with animals, in an isolated farm, hiring himself out to owners of properties around the area and making very poor living this way.
And Alan, now you needed to capture this on film. You need to capture the remoteness and the emotional aspect of what Juan was going through, and these amazing questions that he's forced into at a very young age to ask himself. He's got to do some self-analysis here. How were you able to approach this? It's done really well in the film, but as a filmmaker, this is very difficult.
Well, it's a good question, because at the early stage of this project, I was more intrigued on trying to find evidence of what we were dealing with this UFO phenomenon, or trying to explain what is the UFO phenomenon, or try at least to get some other kind of answer rather than the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But then when I started to work with Juan, I realized that I was dealing with a broken man. So I prefer to help this man to try to find answers on his nightmare, because the only question that he was asking himself was, why this happened to me? Why to me? Because after this contact, he started to have precognitive dreams or premonition dreams that was a living hell for him. Every night he was having these dreams that were more real than our reality. That was the way that he described it. And he was really suffering because he didn't want it to have dreams about death, about accidents that his family were going to have, or other kind of relatives or his friends, etc. So instead of trying to find evidence about the UFO phenomenon, I tried just to focus on the human aspect of this phenomenon. And now I realize that is the most intriguing and most fascinating aspect of this phenomenon, because it's hard to have hardcore evidence, videos or photographs, etc. But I prefer to stay just in the human aspect, and I try to portray the way of living of Juan the best I can, and that's the nature of the film, a truly message about an extraordinary case on a Juan Perez because his name is like the same as a John Doe. It's something like an extraordinary case happened to a John Doe, to a known one. So that's the way of summarizing this.
There's another part of this. It's the foundation of the story, which is Juan and his family. He's a gaucho. He's a cowboy living remotely, not isolated, but living remotely. It's not like he's in the suburb of Buenos Aires. Right.
Yeah.
And he is, him and his family are sturdy folks where they live off the land. They're strong people. And this is somebody that lives that life. You know, he's a very strong, you're a survivor out there. It's not an easy life. And here is somebody that lives this life and he's sitting next to you crying, right? Where he's that type of he's a conflict of his own world, right? On one side he's a gaucho and he's this strong person, and on the other side he's been brought to tears. What was that like for you to experience that?
Well, for me it was very emotional to make this film, and because I have to deal with my own questions, my own way of express myself. And I found out that sitting next to him, I learned a lot of things. Mostly, I learned to trust to another person that I never met. And in the case of Juan, I remember one of the first scenes that we shoot was one with we were drinking mate, that is similar to a tea. And then I started to ask questions about his dreams, about this phenomenon. And then 1 minute after, he started to cry. And it was really hard for me because I didn't know what to do. When I studied film arts, I didn't have like a class, what to do when actors or interviewers start to cry. So I just froze. I just froze myself. And the next day, I started to change every scene and every question. And like I shift all my questions and my scenes in order to help Juan. So that's when I wrote to Jacques, when I showed to Juan some videos about my trip to Paraguay, when I asked some shamans what happened to Juan, how can we help it, because Juan had Guarani roots. With the Guaranis, it's one of the most important indigenous tribes in South America.
And Jacques, there's another interesting twist to all of this. For you as a researcher, there were 2 or 3 other cases, sightings in this town, very small town, in and around Juan's sighting. Can you take us through that? And as a researcher, how did you feel about that, where you had some independent evidence here that would support not only Juan's experience, but the other part of it and the contact that Juan had, because the other sightings didn't have the direct contact, did they?
And you're right. This is very important, because we absent those other cases, you could still say, well, maybe this is a waking dream that this child had. Maybe, it's clear that he didn't make it up, but it could be some sort of hallucination. After all, he's very isolated, in that part of the country. But the fact is that there were these 3 other cases where adults, men, all 3 were men, who were either going to work or coming back from work. And so lights, and Alan did a wonderful job of finding them and re-interviewing them. And you can see the emotion also in their testimony, that they couldn't explain what it was. And you can see the fear in these people who by now are, professional people, and they have a family, they have a job, they have a business. And when Alan interviews them on the film, you can feel that sense of mystery coming back. And this was, again, the same week. And I think that is what, put some substance behind the whole experience. And then you have to go back and say, well, are there other physical correlations to the experience? And there are. For example, there's a mark on the skin of Juan's shoulder. Well, I've done quite a bit of research, both in the U.S. and in France, on people reporting that they wake up with a mark on their skin, which is not explained by anything that they've done. It seems to happen overnight. The horse was tied to. Now you have, some of that makes you laugh, because here's this kid who is 12, is not afraid of anything. He's going into the fog. He meets this extraordinary craft and these extraordinary beings. He climbs the ladder to go see what's inside. He is a very good observer. The details are very clear in his mind when I interviewed him. He ties the horse to the ladder of the craft. The horse, the name of the horse is Cometa, the comet. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, you can't make that up, okay? The horse doesn't like the whole thing. The horse is kicking the ladder, and the horse gets hurt. Now, the kid goes back to the farm with a horse that is hurt, and within a week, the horse became blind, and the horse died. Now, we have lots of cases where people were hurt as a result of a close encounter, and I've done, and I continue to do a special study of medical effects of close encounters. And, I'm communicating with, of course, with doctors. I'm not a doctor myself. And we're trying to find what that could be. But here the kid didn't have any ill effect physiologically. He was not paralyzed. He was not hurt in any way. But the horse died. Now, you end up with a series of observations like this that converge to tell you that something extraordinary did happen, and it was physical. The impression that Juan had ranged from the completely physical to really the mystical, and I think here Alan should talk about this, because he reconstructed his later life. And his life, of course, he's a hunter. He goes into the forest, is very close to animals, is very close to nature, and there is a sense of mysticism that comes from that, which is informed by the experience that he had as a child.
He says, and Jacques,
that too is extraordinary.
Yeah, Jacques, you bring up one of the, for me, an emotional connection in this film that got to me, which Juan says, I can't talk to people. My friends are my animals. My friends are my dogs. And that's who I can communicate with today. And that just rips at you, because he doesn't feel that people will understand his experience. And he's been dealing with this now for 35 years, right, Alan?
Well, even in his connection with Alan, as open and gentle and smart as Alan was, he was discovering this for the first time. That's why I felt that I could help, because Juan remembered my visit to his family and to his farm and the conversation we had. So that could close the cycle for him, and it could begin the healing. And that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, how did you choose to approach that aspect of it where he's just emotionally so isolated that truly his only friends in his communication are his own pets and the animals on his farm?
Well, it was easy because I only show the spirit of Juan, his soul, because the way that the movie shows him is the way he is, the way I met him. Very kind man. He has a strong connection with all the nature, with his animals. Also, plenty of people in Venado Tuerto, his hometown, brings him some animals that are really injured, and Juan heals them. So he has a strong connection with the animals. And my only job was to try to portray him as much as I can, the very transparent. I didn't want to add any effects or any kind of bizarre techniques to show the spectacular encounter that he had. I only wanted to show his suffering, his trauma. The particular case in Juan is that he had a supernatural trauma. It's not the same as a biographical trauma. So my only job was to try to describe him as the way I was seeing him.
Yeah, the best way to do that, show Juan Perez with some puppies. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, man, it was just an extraordinary scene. Now, okay, we need to get straight into the other part of this experience, which is the visions of the future. Take us through that, Alan. What was he experiencing in these dreams? And he describes them, if I'm not mistaken, as real. He felt that these were real. He's had dreams, but these dreams were different, right?
Well, he sometimes it's hard for him to explain his experiences, but the way he described them is like we have this reality when we are awake, no? So Juan told me that his dreams were more real than our reality. Because he knows how to distinguish two kinds of dreams, the regular dream and these kind of dreams. But the trigger is when he dreams on his right side, he goes into these dreams that are more real than our reality. But if he dreams like to the left side, he will have like regular dream. So when he's like sleeping and then when he's dreaming, he goes into his right side, he goes directly to this super real dream, and then he goes very immediately to the other side in order to stop this kind of vision. And during like 35 years, he had this kind of dreams. But one of the peculiar thing is that when I went to Paraguay, when I met these shamans, these wise men and women, they told me that the way that they had to connect to higher levels or higher realms, it's thanks to the dreams. So we have like this ancient community, the Guarani community, the roots of Juan connect to the spiritual world through dreams, through these kind of dreams. But Juan didn't know that.
That's right.
So,
and let me jump in, Alan. To be clear here, you went to Paraguay, but the shamans that you met there, they were not familiar with Juan Perez and his case. Juan is not there. There is no connection between the two, but you set it up beautifully in the film where you've got Juan describing what he is seeing, and then you go to Paraguay and they describe what you should see when you're making these connections, and the visions were the same, right?
Right. Yes, I made one of my questions before I made this project, after reading many books, after reading plenty of books of Jacques. One of the questions was if there is a connection between the lineage, the ancestry, and the UFO phenomenon. Because when I met the family of Juan, the mother of Juan told me that she had a similar experience when she was a teenager. So then I realized that probably there is a connection, and then I wanted to go to his old roots, that they are from Paraguay, from the Guarani people, from this Guarani tribe. When I went there, I found out that they were familiar with the UFO phenomenon, but not the way as Western people are. They started to talk about this phenomenon as an holographic phenomenon, that it's 50% real and 50% not real, because they told me that this phenomenon comes from two sides. One side represents the evilness, and the other side represents the goodness. So they have to confront this light or this ship or whatever, and start to obligate them to show the real shape of this form. It's really hard to explain, but when they were telling me this experience, I remember all the books of Jacques and started to say, okay, they are telling me the same thing that Jacques described in his books. This is amazing. I have to record this. And that's the background of this story. And
now when we come back after the break, we're going to get into, without giving the film away, but the way that you helped achieve this closure. It's a fascinating thing to watch, and you captured it really well. And of course, the reuniting of Jacques and Juan, which we'll get into right after the break. I can't imagine, Jacques, emotionally, not only for you, but for Juan, what that must have been like. And it's captured in the film, and we'll discuss all of that when we come back after this short break. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. It's not going to take long, and we'll be right back to it. Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, our guests, Alan Stivelman and Jacques Vallee. We're talking about their new film, Witness of Another World. Tomorrow night, Michael Lee Hill. Wednesday night, Caroline Corey. Thursday night, open lines all night long. Now, Jacques, I wanted to say this for the audience. You and I have talked over the years many times about, coming on Fade to Black. And you had said to me, I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit. You had said to me, Jimmy, when I have something to say that is important, we will do this. I promise you. And you said to me earlier today, Jimmy, this is it. This is what I need to talk about. And for you, the story of Juan Perez, why is it so important to you?
Well, it's important on several levels. It's important for the field in general because it is, most UFO stories, somebody has seen something and they report it, and some investigators come and they write up the story and they publish it, and you never know what happens after that. And in the work I've done, I've always tried to take the long view. First, I stay away from the things that are, in all the newspapers and on television and so on. I try to focus on the things where I can get involved with the environment of the witness or witnesses, get to know them, gain their trust, because what they tell you the first time is probably not the whole story. And they, this, as in the case of Juan, these stories are threatening, they are difficult, they are very difficult to insert into everyday life. And even for people to remember what happened, you have to give them the opportunity. And I was listening to what Alan was saying earlier about, he's not knowing what to do when Juan started crying because it's the last thing that he expected. But what happened is that Alan gave a space where these emotions could come up. And of course, a professional psychiatrist knows how to do that. But as investigators, we don't realize that very often you don't really need to have a questionnaire or to have, a series of questions or put people on the spot. And you can just let the situation evolve. And that's what's so beautiful in this movie. So it's very rare that someone has been followed like this. In fact, I don't know of any other case where someone was followed for, from the time he was 14 to the time he was 50, in such detail with his environment. For me, that was a different story. Remember, when I was there, I was 30. I had my wife with me. We were discovering this wonderful country. I mean, I love Argentina. I love the Spanish language. I had a few months before I went to Buenos Aires when Alan invited me. So I used that to relearn enough Spanish that I could speak one-on-one.
You did well, by the way. You did really well. That was impressive.
Well, I love Spanish, and I used to be fluent in Spanish when I was a kid, when I was 15. Of course, I've forgotten a lot of the words, but I still love the language. So I relearned enough of it that I could be alone with Juan, as much as I think tremendously about what Alan has done. There is something about being alone with the witness and just getting into his space, getting into his soul and to his heart and sharing things at that level. You can only do that if you speak the same language. And I'm very frustrated when I'm, for example, in Brazil or in Russia because I can't do that. And so I wanted to be able to do that with Juan. So yes, it was very emotional, and yeah, you'll see in the movie I'm not a very good actor, and I was awkward, and I was, under a lot of emotion, and I think that shows up in the movie.
Yeah, take me to that moment, if you will. I want to ask Alan about that separately, but you guys have a moment that is caught. You guys are reunited after so many years, and I'm reminded of Juan is now an adult, right? But he still
he's a big guy.
Right, he's a big guy, but he still has the same face. He still has the same eyes. And you, the reaction that both of you said to each other at that moment was very honest. Take me through that moment. What were you feeling emotionally when you guys finally reconnected?
Well, we embraced, and to me, it was not just the memory of Juan, but the memory of everything that happened the first time I was there. And, knowing that this summed up his entire experience, and he was very open and very welcoming. So it was easy, but it also brought up a lot of things. I mean, when the first time I was in Argentina, again, I was with Janine, I was with my wife that I had lost, and I had the feeling that she was with me, that this was something that she would have wanted me to do, to close that cycle, to close that loop.
You said to Juan, you're grown up, but Juan turns to you and says, you still look the same. That was funny. We had a good time. I don't want to give the impression that this was just so emotional that, everybody was crying. I mean, we had a good time. It was a joyous, I think for both of us, I think it was a joyous reunion. It was the same thing with his family. His father was still alive. His mother is still alive. By the way, what Alan said about his mother having had experiences, when I met her, she was very quiet. She was, of course, serving the big lunch that we had. The thing they do in Argentina, which is wonderful, is when somebody comes visit, they have what they call an asado. And, of course, Argentina has the best meat in the world. Mm-hmm. And they put, a bunch of tables together. They invite all the neighbors. They invited, the investigators who were with us, and Fabio Serpa and his sons, and the whole family was there. And it was a very joyous occasion. His father greeted us dressed in the traditional gaucho, when I was there the first time, gaucho clothing, with silver pesos on his belt. I mean, it was very clear who was in charge. And any question that the kid would have invented a story. Right.
That's when you met the father, that was impossible. And again, it was a joyous occasion also for the family. And I think the great thing that Alan did was reconciling, making it possible for the family to greet Juan as part of the family again. That this experience was extraordinary, but it was now recognized, it was acknowledged. And I think that I don't know if people see that in the movie. It was very clear when we were there.
Yeah,
again, it was fun.
It was.
His father had this hat, traditional leather hat, and I had a picture of him when I was there, 35 years before, wearing the same hat. So I said, "Señor, es el mismo sombrero, it's the same hat." And he laughed and he said, "Yes, it's the same hat." And, that was, all of a sudden, there was no distance. There was no, things were simple.
And there was something.
I think that's what I value in that kind of experience. That's the part that's extraordinary.
Yes, and there was a change. Alan, I have to ask you about this. because you met Juan early on. You're making this film, and during the film, you start to see a different Juan. There's a Juan in the beginning, there's a Juan in the middle, and there's a Juan at the end. There's a transformation that happens with him. And I feel in the film, it started with the reuniting of Jacques and Juan. You see this change in him personally. Is that what you were capturing? Did you feel that too?
Yes, of course. And we all felt it because one of the things that we did is to shoot this film in a whole year. We didn't take like 3 weeks or 4 weeks to make this documentary and that's it, because one of our mission was to help Juan. So in order to help him, we need time. So when we received the response from Jacques saying that he's coming to Argentina, it was one of the best gifts that I've ever had, and the movie also. And the whole script and the whole movie changed, because now we have like one of the most important scenes is this reunion that I was very nervous, but that time sitting next to Jack, waiting to Juan to come. And we see the whole transformation of Juan since the beginning till the end, because Juan is, when the movie is going, when you are seeing the movie, you are evolving next to Juan. You are seeing that he's closing his questions, his doubts, also his nightmares, because now he understands why he had those dreams, why he had that encounter. Thanks to Jack, thanks to Dr. Nestor Berlanda, the psychiatrist, thanks to the shamans. It's like he has all the pieces together, and all the conclusions were like, we didn't say like, Juan, what is happening to you is like blah blah blah. He made all those conclusions. We just like brings all the pieces, and the rest of the game was up to him.
Now, I want to get into some specifics about these visions of the future that Juan was having. We've mentioned them a few times tonight, but specifically, what was reoccurring is he was seeing a darkness, a dark scene, a dark wall, a dark world. He says this over and over again. It's very traumatic, not only as a viewer of watching this film, but for him. They were happening over and over again. Certainly some of these answers happened in Paraguay. We'll get to that in a second. But these visions, what were they, Alan?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that question because it was really hard for me to understand it. But I like to see those visions or the dream world as a symbol, not a literal world. Probably if we see the way we treat our earth, our nature, that kind of vision is not away from our reality of our present time. So Juan was having this like kind of dream very repeatedly, and he was really suffering because it's not a good image to have. But one of the things that I was really intrigued was that the beings of his encounter were the ones who were helping us as a humanity to be like separate from that thing that was coming to Earth. So these kind of ships or beings were helping us to stay safe from that storm or that storm that was coming to our Earth.
An ending almost.
Yeah, an ending, like apocalypse.
Right. And that aspect of it, Jacques, you have spoken about this in not only in your books, but your research and your presentations over the years, that there is a very definite interdimensional aspect to the UFO question. It may not necessarily be nuts and bolts and metal craft and flying saucers. It's that too as well, but there's an interdimensional aspect to this. And with Juan's case and his experiences, for you, this is exactly what you've been researching, right?
Well, and the case gives us the opportunity to look at this in detail,
right?
And through Juan's reactions, there is a scene that I hadn't really paid too much attention to the first time, but when you see the movie again, and by the way, we should tell people when they can see the movie. I mean, it's going to be on Netflix on the 22nd of October,
yep.
right?
Yep.
And it's going to be on other networks or just Netflix?
I think it will be live on Netflix 6 months ahead, but now it will be live on all platforms: iTunes, Amazon, Google, Vimeo on Demand, etc.
Yeah, we've got all the links for it. I announced it earlier in the show, and all the links, everybody, are over at jimmychurchradio.com.
So there's a scene where, and I think Alan was there at Juan's home, at Juan's isolated cabin there, and the evening comes, and Juan goes around the house, the cabin, carefully closing all the shutters, and he doesn't go out at night. Now, this is a hunter. This is a big guy. He's not afraid of anything. He's got 3 hunting dogs. He kills animals to feed himself, to get the meat. He's not somebody who is afraid. But here, he's almost like a child going around, carefully closing the shutters, and you hear some sounds outside, and you have a feeling that something is permanently lurking around and that he's aware of it, psychically aware of it. And that's a very interesting scene. The reaction, Juan's reaction to all that is very complex because he doesn't understand where it comes from. And that is so similar to so many close encounter cases where, as scientists, we try to measure things, we try to interpret it. Of course, there's the dominant theories that these are spaceships that come from a planet somewhere. And how can it be so intimate and so close to us and so ready to jump out, of the night? Spontaneously in a place like that. This is not like the Nimitz. This is not, we should apologize, with that story. It doesn't have all the things that people expect. It doesn't, the CIA isn't there. There is no cover-up. There is no aircraft carrier. There is no, no F-18 zipping around. There is no infrared camera. There is no recording of anything. It's just one man who is dealing with this in his life and in his environment, but in a way it's 10 times more powerful.
It's strong.
It is 10 times more powerful because you feel that presence, which is really all around us. It's not just, one case here and one case there. It's, and the best way I can explain it, and it's only a metaphor, it's not a physical theory, so, don't blame me for it, but it is as if there was another universe in another dimension coming close and interpenetrating with us. And when it does, it is physical. It leaves traces, it hurts people, or sometimes it helps them.
There's another aspect to this, too, Alan. I wanted to ask you about the way that, you presented the first encounter, or Juan's encounter with the craft in front of him, and the beings. You present them in as light beings almost, and that the craft isn't quite physical. It's not a shiny metal situation. It's almost glowing or transparent. I wanted to ask you, was that the way that Juan has always described this in the past?
No, not the ship, and I think nor this being, because it's really hard to recreate as the way that Juan described it, and rather than to be literally with the reports of Juan, I prefer to try to not to show the phenomenon, to be like very blurry, very very glow, because I didn't want to the audience or the spectators gets a specific idea of a shape, or mostly of what kind of shape that could this phenomenon have. So I prefer to stay a little bit away from that, and rather than to be specific or literally with Juan's report, I prefer to be more abstract rather than concrete.
I got you. And Jacques, when you first interviewed Juan, did he describe an ascension or a descending aspect of the craft? Did he see it land? Did he see it take off? Did he see it fly?
He saw it take off, and but remember, he was in a very thick sort of cloud of fog, and everything was sort of translucent, as Alan has shown very well. He couldn't see the entire shape. He only saw that opening and the ladder, and of course, when he went in, he saw inside that circular room. When he came out, there was a feeling. The communication seemed to be words that appeared in his brain. So it wasn't a verbal communication, but it was formulated in words and ideas that appeared in his brain as if it was really a telepathic channel. Mm-hmm. And there was a feeling that they had to take off. So, this is not really an abduction, because this kid, climbed that ladder to go see what was inside. And when he got the idea that they were going to take off, he left. So it's, in a way, it's a reverse of an abduction, okay? And you have to keep your sense of humor about this, because it's so bizarre. But it's bizarre because it's true. And he goes down the ladder. He gets a horse untied. The tall being is at the foot of the ladder, and they have a final communication, the two of them. And then he gets on the horse, rides into the fog, and the thing takes off behind him. And that's the end of the episode as it's recounted on the film. And I think it's described very well.
Yeah, it is. And there's one, before we take our last break here, there's one thing that Juan says that is fascinating. He says that the beings told him, we got to go back to work. Right? What an amazing statement, that they're here doing business, right? I'm talking about E.T. That they're here working. That was just fascinating to me. Jacques, do you have a comment on that, or Alan?
No, that's what he said.
Yeah, no comments.
Yeah, right, exactly. I just remember sitting back going, well, that's exactly how it went down, right? There isn't any fantastical we're here to give you technology, or we're here to share.
No.
We're here to bring you into the federation of the universe. We're here working. We gotta go. And
they were all business.
Yeah, they were all business. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and wrap this up. Fascinating conversation tonight. This is Fade to Black. Our guests, Alan Stivelman and Jacques Vallee, talking about the new film. It is out October 22nd, Witness of Another World. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. Our guests tonight, Alan Stivelman and Jacques Vallee, talking about their new film. It is Witness of Another World, out October 22nd on all the streaming services. The links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. Now, now we're going to go into Act 3. And, Jacques, I wanted to ask you one direct question. And that is, the hero's journey, right? And where you have a beginning and a middle and an end to the hero's journey. And this is playing out for all of us with Juan Perez, isn't it?
Well, it's a sort of initiation as well. And Alan shows that very well in the movie, that, he is really a Guarani kid, but he was never formally initiated in his tradition. And Alan did something extraordinary to reintroduce him to that tradition by taking him before the elders of the tribe and completing that journey for him. And yes, so it is a hero's journey, but it is, in a way, it's more, because he carries that, I think he's less afraid now. He's more reconciled to what happened to him. He sees that he's not the only one who had the experience, that other people, including people from the United States, are puzzled by the same mystery that he's dealing with. But now he's dealing with it as an initiated adult.
And before we get to that, Jacques, I wanted to ask you, you had to reach a point with Juan to shake his hand and say goodbye again. How did you approach that?
That was very funny, and I think it's not on the film, but maybe we should. Alan should make another movie about things like that. We had a reunion with his family, so we had a chance to speak with his sisters and again the father, as I said, and with his mother, and I wanted to give him something that would be unique, and I had a coin that was a copy of a very old French coin that shows a UFO in the sky. And I gave him that, and I explained to him what it was, and he wanted to give me something. So in return, and he gave me his hunting knife. His hunting knife, you have to understand that these people don't have any money. So when he needs a knife, he finds a piece of metal that he can shape into a knife, and he's going to put a handle on it. And he found a blade from a windmill that had broken up, and he took that blade and turned it into really a formidable knife. I mean, the knife was about 18 inches long, and it was very sharp. It was really his hunting knife. And I had to explain to him that, this was a very beautiful gift, but in Miami, I was going to go through U.S. Customs.
Right.
And they probably wouldn't like to see me, traveling with a hunting knife. And so I asked him as politely as I could if he could give me something else. And he gave me his canteen. When he goes out hunting, he goes out for 3 days and 3 nights into the forest. And by the way, there is an episode there that we should ask Alan about, because it is also extraordinary, the vision he had in the forest. But he was hunting a wild pig at one time that charged against him and his dogs. And that wild pig killed 2 of his dogs. And he finally killed the boar. And he thought that this was, of course, very tragic and emotional for him. So he decided to skin the boar, and he put the fur around his canteen. And I still have it, with the little tail of the boar and the fur. And it's a very strange object. It's a very unique object. I wasn't sure I could bring it back into the United States, but, it's just a wild pig, so it wasn't a rare animal. And so I brought it back, and I still have it here with me. And so that's how we parted. And it was very friendly, it was very open, it was very warm, and in the end, it was very funny.
Alan, you take, we're going to save the ending and everything else for everybody when they go and watch the film. But you take Juan Perez to Paraguay. Now, had Juan at that point, had he been outside of Argentina?
It's at the top of Argentina. It's a country that it's mostly indigenous. The official language is Guarani, and their roots comes from that country.
And you take Juan there for a ceremony.
Yeah, indeed. It was one of the ideas that I had at the beginning of this project, because I felt that Juan got like initiation, because at the age of 12 he had this experience. At the 12, it's a very important year for everyone, but especially for the indigenous culture. It's the year or the age that you became a grown man. So Juan accidentally he had like a rite of passage thanks to this encounter. And one of the ideas was to make the mitacaraí. The mitacaraí, it's a ritual that once had after 3 days of dancing and singing, you get your inner name, your spiritual name, because for them everyone has like 2 names: the exterior name, like our name, and the inner name.
And we'll save that. Don't say the name. Let everybody go and watch the film, because I couldn't wait for that moment to happen. Now, so we'll save all of that for everybody to go watch in the film. What I am interested in, save the big reveal, right? Because it's an extraordinary ending. But tell me about Juan's interactions that went on there with the shamans that isn't in the film. Did he have an opportunity to ask questions about his visions, and did he get answers from them?
Yes, there were some times, but Juan was mainly focused on the interaction with the boys, with the girls, with the old guys that were from that community. It was really, for me, it was very emotional to see him interacting, because it felt that he was like recovering one part of his soul interacting with them. He took off his shoes, started to walk on the land, on the ground, like he belongs to that community for a long, long time. And the welcoming was very, very powerful because the elder Francisco, the grandfather Francisco, told all the community that everyone has to be with Juan at all times. No, Juan couldn't be alone in any minute. So you see, I saw Juan interacting with all the community at all times, and he had the opportunity to ask about his visions, about his dreams, and for them, these kind of supernatural things are pretty common. They are not scared of any kind of, they are not afraid of the unknown, and they just try to help him in a way that he can understand it by saying, for example, his grandfather, the grandfather of Juan, was the only one that had the Guarani roots on his blood. So he passed away when Juan was 10 years old. So Juan was really, really, really alone by that time. He was asking himself questions that, for example, what is life? Why this happened to me? Why my grandfather died? And the grandfather Francisco told Juan that by that time, Juan was finding himself, was trying to find himself by asking these kind of questions, probably in an unconscious level. And suddenly he had an answer, it was a supernatural answer. It was the spiritual world came to him in a bizarre way with two beings that he couldn't understand. He couldn't integrate that experience and the gift that he had after it, because Juan had these premonition dreams. So after 40 years, thanks to this journey that we made with the film, he could now integrate the whole experience that he had 40 years ago.
There's one I want everybody that watches this film to remember what I am going to say now. In the beginning of the film, I want you to look into Juan's eyes, because at the end of the film, his eyes change. At the end of the film, they are bright, they are alive. And you get to experience and see that in this film. Alan, did you see the same thing? Did you see his eyes were just vivid at the end of the film?
Yeah. It's a different man, and I was really joy because I was part of this transformation. I was like the bridge that could help to Juan to close that circle. And I know that Jacques will agree with me that everyone that was involved in that movie closed some circles of our life.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's incredible to see. And for you, Jacques, for as long as you've known Juan, that transition was there, right? Did you see it in his eyes at the end of the film?
I wasn't part of the trip to Paraguay, but already when there is a scene where we're all around Juan in the country, and drinking and talking, and Alan invites Juan to come to that initiation in Paraguay. And in that moment, you see already that Juan has changed. He's much freer. He's much happier. You see it in the way he handles himself.
He smiles for the first time during that scene, by the way. And I agree with you. And he also calls Alan the big man.
Yes.
That is a great scene.
Well,
that is a great scene. Okay, now let's shift gears a little bit, Jacques, while I have you for a few more short minutes here. You go back now, we're talking 4-5 decades of UFO research. And today, I think that we're at a little bit of a tipping point. The door is cracked open with this subject like never before. Did you ever feel that, going back to, the early 70s to where we are today, it's 2019, where the world, not just the United States, but around the world now, this is a global situation, that this subject now is freely discussed without cueing the X-Files music and people making jokes. Did you ever think that we would be at this point? How do you feel about that?
I'm of two minds on this. Yes, the subject is now more accepted. Now, remember, we've gone to the moon. We're going to go back. The idea of life in the universe is much more open. What I'm afraid of is that the public will be captured by some easy answers. Now that people are looking at they say, "Oh yeah, well, we knew it all along. It's beings from another star somewhere," and I'm really afraid of that. People talk about disclosure. The question is disclosure of what? To me, there is no need for any announcement from the White House or anybody else. The phenomenon, the witnesses know that the phenomenon is real, and we have to be very careful not to jump to premature answers or to easy answers, because it's not easy.
Well, you know how the UFO community and all of the researchers out there look up to you, Jacques, and listen to your words, and they listen very carefully. But I know that you're also very aware that those of us, myself included, in the UFO community, we all say, Jacques got the real stuff, right? Jacques knows things. And I said to you, if you remember, we were backstage and you and I were alone, and I tried to get some of these answers out of you privately. And do you have those secrets that are rumored out there about Jacques Vallee? Is there something that you know that you want us to know?
What I know that is very precious to me is what I've learned from witnesses. Again, I've trained myself over the years to listen better and better, not to come to them with preconceived ideas, but to really listen to them and to try to share in the experience. Remember that I had a sighting when I was 15, and there were 2 other witnesses. There is no question that thing was there. I was not close to it, but I've never forgotten that, and I think that's what continues to guide me. And I don't want to be influenced by people assuming that I have these answers and so on. I'm not preaching anything. I'm not selling anything. And by the way, I think in terms of full disclosure, I have no financial interest in this movie. This is Alan's movie. I really wanted to. It was almost a magical thing for me that Alan has offered me. It was an incredible gift to have the opportunity to to reconnect with Juan and with my own emotions of the time, and I didn't want that to have anything to do with any financial interest whatsoever. I make a living in Silicon Valley, and I'm fortunate to be able to live the life I want. I really wanted to have no tie to this movie other than the incredible friendship that I've developed with Alan and my respect for what he does as an artist and the connection to that land. One thing is that that part of Argentina is pretty dull. It's very flat. It gets inundated when there is rain, and Alan has managed to bring out the magic of it. And that, when you've been there, that magic is absolutely wonderful. So it was, it was an incredible experience for me.
Alan, is there another chapter to Juan Perez? Is there other places that you can go with this story?
Well, yes, absolutely yes, because after 2 years that we finished on the shooting, we keep doing some research on Juan. Also, we practice Juan regression on Juan, and Juan started to recover some lost memories that he had, and we also found out that it was not the case of his 12 years old. It was not his first, the only case that he has. He also had 2 other cases when he was 40 and another one when he was 45. So as Jacques said, we need to see these witnesses as a whole, as in the long term. We cannot go just to take some notes about what they saw and that's it. We need to keep investigating those cases and see what happens after those encounters, because somehow the magic happens after those encounters, not before nor in the moment of the encounter, because this phenomenon deals with the conscious. So in some way, they will not be the same as before the encounter. So it's really important to keep doing some research after those contacts.
And Jacques, in closing, I wanted to ask you, how important is it to have not only fresh faces, but a fresh way of looking at this phenomenon with a filmmaker like Alan, who isn't tainted, right? He's got another way to approach this. We need this in the UFO community, don't we?
Well, I see that, at my advanced age, I think that's the last contribution I can make is to transmit some of that, both the data and also the understanding or the methodology that we can use around the data. And fortunately, there are, younger people coming into the field with equipped with different resources, different tools. In the case of Alan, it's his camera and his knowledge of cinema and his artistic training. And there are others, doctors and physicists and psychologists and so on. And I think that's it's very important for my generation to transmit that and let others take it forward.
And
that's what I'm devoting time to right now.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, Jacques. And I'm being very serious on behalf of the community. Everything that you have not only contributed to, but the way that you continue to move all of this forward on behalf of the community. I want to thank you for your commitment. And Alan, I've got to say, are you prepared? Are you prepared for the questions and what this movie is about to do? Are you prepared for this?
I have to say no. Honestly, I'm not fully aware of what's coming, but I'm eager to see what the audience will say about the movie, about what the American audience will receive, because I know that most of the documentaries and movies about this phenomenon are quite different from our movie, our message, because in a simple way, we only focus on the human aspect. For me, it's one of the most important aspects of this phenomenon. But I'm really eager to see what will happen with the reactions and with all the feedback.
Congratulations. The film is extraordinary. And again, October 22nd is the worldwide release. All the links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. Jacques, Alan, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Jimmy.
Thank you very much.
We'll speak soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Jacques Vallee, Alan Stivelman, and I can't say it enough, the links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. The worldwide release is October 22nd. This is Fade to Black. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to come back and open up the phone lines, and I want to get everybody's reaction on this amazing conversation tonight. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you, Alan. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. I'll be right back after this short break.